The Ultimate Husband. By Sky Kissing Wolf. Episode 53. Elsa Linden furrowed her brows as she stood at the side. Even though she seldom talked to Daryl, she was still a member of the Linden family. If Daryl were to make a fool of himself, would she not be embarrassed as well? When Kingston realized the identity of that young man, and after a brief moment of stupor, he said, "Aren't you the Linden family's son-in-law?" Before he could continue, Vaughn interrupted softly, "Dad, he is the honorary antique appraiser I hired." What? Everyone tried to stifle their giggles. What? He is a reputable antique appraiser? More like famous trash. The Linden family can't wait to get rid of him because he is useless. And Yvonne made him the honorary antique appraiser? That's funny. Kingston sighed as he stared at Daryl. Then he nodded and did not say anything else. The Young family's properties had fallen under the management of Yvonne Young. She had done an excellent job. Since my daughter hired this young man, I guess he must be a talented man. Even though Daryl's name was dragged through the mud in Donghai City, Kingston believed in his daughter. With Kingston's consent, Daryl stepped forward and scrutinized the porcelain vase. Everyone else was silent. However, the atmosphere was obviously different than before that. When Kingston appraised the vase, everyone waited respectfully. However, at that moment, they watched Daryl like he was a clown. An honorary antique appraiser? Him? Yvonne Young is still too green. She must have believed the young man because of what had happened last time. Well, let's wait and see how he embarrasses himself. The other antique store owners had the same thoughts. Yvonne, on the other hand, waited anxiously. She thought that Daryl was overconfident about the situation. Why would he want to look at it again after my father had appraised it? My dad would definitely bomb it on me if he were to make a blunder. Daryl studied the vase carefully for a few seconds. Then he suddenly reached out and stroked the porcelain vase a few times. "What are you doing? Can you afford to pay for it if you were to break it?" The bald man scowled, and he told Daryl off quickly. The other antique store owners also shook their heads disapprovingly. That young man obviously doesn't know anything. To appraise porcelain, one might have to rely on the look, listen, compare and feel technique. One could listen to the porcelain by tapping the porcelain lightly to distinguish its body. It was deemed unprofessional to stroke the surface like Daryl had done. However, Kingston narrowed his eyes slightly. Daryl's action might seem random or on a whim, but it looked like he had paid great attention to the detail. Where have seen such a unique method of identification? Suddenly, Daryl stopped his action and put the porcelain vase to his ear to listen quietly. After that, Daryl put the item down and looked at Yvonne. "How much does he want for this?" The bald man immediately said, $500,000, and not a penny less. "Only $500,000. Daryl smiled stealthily. Then he turned to Yvonne and said confidently, "Buy it." When Daryl learned antique appraisal with a master of Chinese studies, he had majored in porcelain. The porcelain vase was top quality in terms of its glaze and texture, as Kingston described, but its shape was somewhat peculiar. That was why Daryl was a little confused initially, but soon, he discovered some soil stuck at the bottom of the vase. The soil had a musty odor of mold. That affirmed Daryl's guess that the vase must be an ancient artifact that had just been unearthed. That was right. The ancient artifact had only just been unearthed. Before Yvonne could react to Daryl's claim, someone in the crowd laughed. Then, everyone joined in a fit of laughter. "Oh, that's too funny. Hey, young ma, do you really think that you are an appraiser? And you even said that it is worth $500,000? This thing probably only cost a few $1,000s, at most." "That's right. Manager Young said that it was fake. Why are you pulling a funny act here?" Amidst the laughter and ridicule, Yvonne's complexion turned ugly. Kingston shook his head in disappointment. They must have thought that he would have a different perspective, but he seemed to have arrived at his conclusion too soon. Episode 54. Kingston took a deep breath, his expression also looked hideous. He turned around and whispered to Yvonne, "Is this the honorary antique appraiser you hired? For $50,000 a month? Even if our family has the money, that is no need to spend in such a reckless manner." Yvonne said nothing, a trace of shame flashed in her eyes. The bald man, as though he had met his confidant, he patted Daryl's shoulder and said, "This brother is indeed knowledgeable." Daryl merely smiled. Kingston stared at Daryl sternly and said coldly, "Tell me. How is this thing worth $500,000? No, it is worth more than that. It's worth more than $5 million. You will make a lot of money if you buy it." Daryl thought to himself. Then, he cleared his throat and said slowly, "Uncle Young, don't be anxious. I'll explain it to you. Uncle Young knows about Princess Wencheng, right?" Kingston was a little impatient. When he heard the name, he was suddenly reminded of something, and his body quivered in shock. "Did you mean?" Then, Kingston shook his head. "Impossible, absolutely impossible." The historical records about Princess Wencheng were mainly about her marriage to a Tibetan prince. However, in the antique world, there was hearsay about Princess Wencheng. Princess Wencheng had loved porcelain since she was child. When the Emperor Taizong of Tang gave her an imperial edict to marry into a Tibetan kingdom, he also gave her a porcelain vase. The porcelain vase was rumored to be a tributary from the Tibetan kingdom to the emperor. The unique geographical location of the Tibetan kingdom had made its culture greatly influenced by the culture of the Tang dynasty and Tay western regions. Therefore, the porcelain made by the Tibetan imperial family was exceptional and very rare. Almost nothing of the art had remained in the modern days. It was rumored that Princess Wencheng liked that porcelain vase very much, and she took it with her wherever she went. Gradually, the porcelain vase gained spirituality. It was said that when one put their ears to the mouth of the vase and listened carefully, one could hear the sound of water gurgling from the inside. That was because every time the princess missed her hometown, the Tang kingdom, she would sit by the stream with her beloved vase as she reminisced about her past. It was also rumored that the princess's beloved vase had a supernatural attribute. Before the Princess Wencheng was married, her real name was Li Shuyan. Hence, people from the later generations named the vase as Shuyan Promenade Vase. Very few people had seen the actual Shuyan Promenade Vase, and it disappeared after the demise of Princess Wencheng. It was not until the end of Qing dynasty that the Shuyan Promenade Vase miraculously appeared in a gentry's home in Jiangnan. The news spread, and the members of that family were killed within a few days. Then the Shuyan Promenade Vase went missing again. The location of the vase or whether it was destroyed remained a mystery. Therefore, when Daryl mentioned Princess Wencheng, Kingston immediately thought of the rumor. Did he mean that this vase is the Shuyan Promenade Vase? That's impossible. Could such a speculative artifact appear in Pearl Pavilion? No way. Kingston's thoughts spun quickly, his facile expressions changed continuously, which surprised the crowd. Daryl pointed at the vase in front of him. He said with a smile, "Uncle Young, even though the shape of this porcelain vase is very peculiar, it is very similar to the style of the Tang dynasty, and at the same time, it has the taste of the western regions. It is the unique location of Tibet that created this neither fish nor fowl piece of art. The colorful glaze on it was influenced by the western region's culture. It lacks the Tang dynasty's ancient charm and has more of the western region's aesthetics for vibrant colors. Look at this colorful glaze again. It is so beautiful and dazzling, it feels like it was made in modern times." The Tibetan had added some colored glazed elements when they applied the paint. He was not loud, but what he said made sense. There was a moment of silence. Everyone was in a daze. Besides Kingston, no one else could understand what Daryl had said. What about the Tibetan kingdom? Why did he mention colored glaze? Darryl noticed that Kingston was still in doubt, so he said with a smile, "It was the colored glaze on the outside that strengthened the body of this porcelain vase. It made it last for thousands of years without any bumps and cracks." Gulp. One could almost hear it when Kingston swallowed his saliva. Then, he placed his ears at the mouth of the vase and listened carefully. Is this really the Xuan Promenade vase? After about 10 seconds, Kingston's expression changed from doubtful to shocked, and finally, he looked at Darryl in astonishment. His voice became a little hoarse due to excitement. "What? Xuan Promenade vase?" The expressions of the antique store owners changed drastically. When Darryl explained the details of the porcelain vase, they were still in disbelief. However, after they heard Kingston repeated the name of the vase, they all stood in shock. Of course, they had heard of the Xuan Promenade vase. Who in the antique industry had not heard about it? Episode 55. Yvonne and Elsa felt weak around their knees. They were shocked. Could he really tell if the vase was an antique? The look of ecstasy on Kingston's face had utterly removed their doubts. "Hey, after such a long discussion, do you want to do this or not?" The bald man got a little impatient. Darryl smiled stealthily. This guy's must be a layman. He brought a priceless treasure to Pearl Pavilion, but he is only asking for only $500,000. When he thought about the mud residue at the bottom of the porcelain vase, Darryl was confident that the vase had just been dug out from somewhere. This bald man seems mysterious. Where did he get this vase? Darryl frowned as he thought to himself. "Yes. I'll buy it." Kingston repeatedly nodded as if he was afraid that the bald man would regret his decision. Then, Kingston turned around and urged Peter Williams. "Quick, pay this gentleman." After that, he carefully picked up the porcelain vase and told Yvonne to bring a box to stow it away. The other antique store owners were all green with envy. They all looked at Darryl differently. This young man knows his stuff. Peter paid the bald man. The seller took his phone and checked his bank account before he happily left the store. Kingston looked at Darryl and said, "Darryl, I did not expect that you have such in-depth knowledge in antiques." Yvonne had found the right person, indeed. "Even though you are young, you are well accomplished." Darryl smiled politely when the older gentleman praised him. "You have helped me to gain a rare piece of treasure. I'll treat you to dinner this evening. How about a few drinks for the two of us?" Kingston looked at Darryl eagerly and extended an invitation. The Xuan Promenade vase. Kingston could not believe that the speculative treasure had fallen into his hands. Kingston was thrilled, he was beyond excited. Apart from delight, he had also developed a keen interest in Darryl. He had only known Darryl as the Linden family's live-in son-in-law. He had never expected Darryl's outstanding display of skills at Pearl Pavilion. "I have to talk to this young man and get to know him better." However, Darryl seemed uninterested in Kingston's invitation. Darryl thought about the bald man. "Drinks? Perhaps another day. I still have something to attend to, so I have to go." He noticed that the bald man had walked toward the end of the street. Darryl spoke quickly before he dashed out of Pearl Pavilion. Kingston and Yvonne exchanged looks of doubt with each other. They had no idea why Darryl had left in such a hurry. When Darryl got outside, he saw that the bald man had not gone far, so he followed him from a distance. The bald man had successfully sold the porcelain vase for money. He was overjoyed. He was very vigilant and looked around as he walked as if he was afraid that someone would target him. It was an act of guilty conscience. Darryl did not dare to get too close to him as he noticed that the bald man was on high alert. After they passed an intersection, the bald man got into a van. The vehicle turned around and drove toward the north of the city. Darryl frowned and quickly returned to his Audi R8. His sports car had a good performance. It did not take long before he managed to catch up with the van. Darryl kept a distance between their two cars so that the man would not notice him. After about half an hour, Darryl arrived in Beishan. He trailed behind the van in his car. Beishan was an undeveloped barren hill in Donghai City. It was also a mass graveyard. Many poor people were buried there because their families did not have money to buy a burial plot. The sun had set, and the sky had gradually darkened. The van stopped at a gentle slope. Then, the driver and the bald man got down and walked up the mountain road. Darryl did not want to waste any time, so he got out of his car and followed the two men. The mountain breeze blew steadily. The tombstones scattered among the tall grass on both sides of the mountain pathway made Darryl's hair stand. These two guys aren't digging dead people. Treasures in this deserted graveyard, are they? Did they dig the Shuiyan promenade vase from this mountain? Many thoughts ran through his mind before he heard movements ahead of him. Darryl sped up and found a hiding spot behind a tree to observe the situation quietly. He was stunned by the sight. He saw a dozen people, with various hand tools like shovels and hammers in their hands, as they dug a cave. They were all sweaty as they had worked under the scorching sun. There was a bearded man, and he seemed to be the group's leader as he continued to bark orders at the rest of them. The bearded man asked the bald man who had just returned, "Hey, Johnny, you're back. How was it?" The bald man is called Johnny? Did he get his nickname from Dwayne Johnson, the cool bald bloke? Darryl, who hid behind the tree, almost laughed out loud. He thought that the name was too funny. The bald man waved his phone in the air with excitement. "I made it. Sold it for $500,000. Fuck. The vase is that valuable?" The bearded man was first startled, and then he was thrilled. The other people there were also excited to hear that. "Yeah, brother. It looks like we're in the right place. Yes, we are going to make a huge fortune." The bearded man yelled when he noticed that the others had stopped as they were overwhelmed with joy. "Why did you guys stop? The vase that we got was worth that much money. There must be a lot of other good stuff in here. Get to work. Let's dig for more items." Everyone continued to dig painstakingly. Darryl was perturbed to see what had happened. Episode 56. So, they dug the Shuiyan promenade vase from here. It looks like this graveyard has some secrets. Then again, those men do not seem to be digging with care. What if they destroy the cultural relics? Those were treasures left by our ancestors. What should I do? When Darryl about his next step, he heard the bearded man yelled angrily, "Who is it? Why are you sneaking around there? Come out now." Darryl was shocked. "Damn it. He saw me." Darryl was about to walk out from behind the tree when he saw the bearded man pull a gloomy face and walked straight to another tree about 10 meters away. "How dare you raid the graves? This is a criminal offense. You guys should stop." Before the bearded man got to the tree, a soft voice emerged from behind the tree. Phew. Darryl thought he had been exposed. Darryl sighed in relief when he heard the soft and charming voice. Then, he saw a gentle and sexy figure walked out from behind the tree. Darryl was stunned. Her delicate face was covered with dust, and she showed fearlessness and unbending dignity. It was none other than Megan Costello. Why is she here? Megan frowned. When she got off work at the police station, she saw a group of people had snuck up to Beishan. With her years of criminal investigation experience, she had a hunch that those people were up to no good, so she followed them. It was after work hours, and Megan was dressed in her casual clothes without her self-defense weapon. Therefore, when she saw the group of people had raided tombs, she did not act rashly. Instead, she waited for an opportunity to call her colleagues for support. Unfortunately, before she could send out a message to get help, the bearded man had seen her. The bearded man was startled by Megan's beauty. Even the rest of his group had also fixated their eyes on Megan. Wow! There is a beautiful woman on this barren mountain. What a surprise, the bearded man said after he regained his senses. He smiled at Megan. The bald man and the others teased the woman. Oh fuck, she is so beautiful. What an attractive aura of a domineering lady. I don't mind cutting 10 years from my life if I can get her. When he heard his accomplices, the bearded man smiled and ogled at Megan. He said, "Hey, pretty, we have been so bored after a long day at work. Would you like to play with us?" Megan's chest heaved in anger as she cursed, "Watch your mouth. I am the criminal investigation team leader of Donghai City." After she introduced herself, Megan yelled at the bald man group, "Put down everything in your hands and stand in a line." The group of people were shocked to hear the command from Megan. They began to look a little fearful. "I have heard about a beautiful policewoman in Donghai City, she must be the one." The bearded man clenched his fists, the corners of his mouth curled into a sneer. "So, you are the beautiful policewoman that everyone else had mentioned." As he spoke, he stealthily waved his hands. The bald man and his men quietly advanced and flanked Megan when they received the signal. "What are you doing?" Megan shouted sharply. There was a trace of ferocity on the bearded man's face. He asked in return, "What do you think we're doing?" Damn it, there was no way out. They would not surrender so easily and allowed themselves to be caught. As soon as the bearded man finished talking, the bald man and his group charged forward. Megan's eyes flashed with a cold fury, and she moved quickly without waiting for her opponent to approach her. Ouch! As the criminal investigation team leader, Megan was rather skillful in sparring. In merely a few seconds, she had managed to defeat a dozen of them. Nonetheless, she was still outnumbered. Soon, Megan lost her focus, and the bearded man had the chance to sneak an attack on her and tied her with a rope. "So what if you are the criminal investigation team leader? I managed to subdue you, haven't I? Hey, don't stare at me like that. Wait until we are done this dig, my baby, and then we'll play with you." After he kept Megan bound, the bearded man smiled. He looked at Megan lecherously. Megan glared at the bearded man. "Don't be too arrogant, none of you can get away with this." Megan's face flushed red, and her delicate body trembled in a fury. She looked so captivating in that state. The bearded man met her gaze momentarily. 2 seconds later, he laughed. He said in an impish tone, "Are you trying to play rough with me? I can't believe you still think that you can catch us. I'll let you experience the joy of Baina woman and then bury you up here. Let's see how you can catch us then." Huh. Megan was furious, she bit her lips. As Donghai City's criminal investigation team leader, she was strict and harsh with her team. She had always appeared respectable in front of the outsiders, like a queen. How could she withstand the humiliation by a tomb raider? "You guys think you're brave, don't you? Not only did you guys raid the tombs, but you are also disgusting salacious perverts." That voice came slowly from not too far away. Megan, the bearded man and the rest of the group immediately looked in that direction. They saw Daryl there with a smile on his face. "You?" Megan was surprised and delighted to see that it was Daryl. At the same time, she was also a little worried. The group of unscrupulous people were desperate. It would not end well for him if he were to fall into their hands. Megan began to shout anxiously, "Quick, run away and call the police." However, Daryl did not move. He made no effort to run away at all. The bearded man frowned and looked at Daryl as he said coldly, "Who are you?" His bald accomplice pointed at Daryl dumbly. "Fuck. Aren't you the antique appraiser at Pearl Pavilion?" "Antique appraiser?" Megan and the others were stunned. What antique appraiser? Megan knew Daryl as the Linden family's live-in son-in-law. "Hurry up." Megan was flustered as she looked at Daryl and shouted. The bearded man took a pill from his pocket and stuffed it into Megan's mouth. "Shut up, bitch," he said with a wicked smile. "I'll take care of this brat, and then it'll be your turn." Megan was forced to swallow the pill. Soon, her legs became jelly. "What the hell did you give me?" Episode 57. Don't freak out, beautiful. Don't worry, it's not poison. It's weak bones elixir. It will only weaken you. The bearded man smiled menacingly. Megan was struck in a stupor, and she was at a loss for words. Weak bones elixir? What a mess. Daryl scowled. The bearded man must have been a mental patient who had just escaped the mental hospital and talked gibberish. "Hey, brat. Did you fucking follow me? What the hell do you want? I sell vases, and you paid for them. Why did you follow me?" The bald man and his group gathered around Daryl and asked him fiercely. "I was the only one who thought that your vase was valuable. Don't you want to thank me for that?" Daryl pretended to sigh before he walked closer to them step by step. Daryl was a little nervous. He learned Wing Chun Kung Fu from a Wing Chun master for a year before, but Daryl was not sure about sparring against so many people. Therefore, Daryl needed to find a way to get the other party to let down their guard. "Thank you." Sure enough, the bald man was dumbfounded when he heard that. At the same time, the other people who approached Daryl also stopped dead in their tracks. Daryl rejoiced. He walked toward them slowly and began to make up nonsense. "The vase you had was a counterfeit. If it wasn't for me, could you have possibly sold it?" "Counterfeit?" The bald man was shocked to hear that. Instinctively, he reached up to scratch his head. Without warning, Daryl charged forward. Wham! The bald man was caught off guard, and Daryl smashed his face. He was sent sprawling onto the ground. Daryl wasted no time, he turned around and charged toward the others. "Fuck! Kill him!" The bearded man was startled and angry as shouted frantically to his group members. He did not expect Daryl to be so fast and precise with his shots. Each of his punches landed square and hard on his opponent. Within half a minute, almost a dozen men were on the ground. "You. Who are you?" The bearded man was panicked when he was the only one left. He stammered as he looked blankly at Daryl. Daryl answered with a faint smile, "I'm the antique appraiser from Pearl Pavilion." Daryl kicked the bearded man, and the man flew a few meters away. He passed out when his body landed on the ground. Megan stared blankly at Daryl. She was so perplexed that she even forgot to blink. "You dash." Megan opened her mouth to say something, but her body had weakened under the influence of the weak bones elixir. She had no strength to control her body, it was even hard to speak. "Can you walk?" Daryl knelt and untied the rope on Megan. Megan shook her head, she was embarrassed. "What the hell is that weak bones elixir? Why is it so strong?" Daryl furrowed his brows when he noticed that Megan was in bad shape. "Let me see if there is an antidote on them." Daryl turned around and started to search. However, there was no sign of an antidote except for some personal belongings. "Oh? What's that?" Daryl caught a glimpse of a dark thing by the side of the tomb, which the bearded man had opened. Daryl went to take a closer look at the black box. The quaint-looking box was dilapidated. There were carved flowers on it, but the designs were frayed and tattered from years of neglect. The box was in the pit, so it was out of Megan's sight. Daryl opened it curiously. Inside the box, there were two yellowed ancient books. One was The Geomancy of Yin and Yang, and the other was The Infinite Elixir. What the hell? From the book's title, one is about the geomancy of feng shui, and another one is about alchemy. Didn't all ancient people like alchemy? Daryl thought as he flipped through The Geomancy of Yin and Yang. As the name suggested, the book was all about feng shui. Modern days people were superstitious, and they trusted in feng shui principles when they wanted to choose a good house. Therefore, some feng shui masters could make a lot of money. The book was meant to teach one about feng shui. As he flipped through the pages, a row of small prints greeted his eyes. Feng shui has a long history. It was also known as the art of Qing Nong, and the technique of Qing Nong is divided into yin and yang. In feng shui, burial of the dead must be done according to the elements of qi and water. Good flow of wind will gather auspicious qi, and the flow of terrain to capture water. Darrell read it aloud in low voice. At first, he thought that it was somewhat unintelligible, but when he dissected the phrases carefully, it was not that hard to understand at all. It was interesting, so Darrell continued to read. The first half of The Geomancy of Yin and Yang was all about Yin Feng Shui, the burial plot for the deceased. The influence of Feng Shui principles in the careful selection of the land and the cemetery layout was described in the book. Episode 58. The second half of the book was about Yang Feng Shui, which described the Yang house's selection, the house of the living. Regardless of the Yin house or the Yang house, there were many detailed descriptions and even more specific illustrations. Fuck, isn't this house similar to mine? Darrell was shocked when he saw one of the pictures in the book. Then, he read the detailed explanation on the next page. The layout lacks water-gathering elements, and it affects the living who stays within, making their lives difficult. Darrell finally saw the light. No wonder Lily Linden's family was in a time of tribulation. Lily's company was always short of funds. It turned out that it was not human error, but the terrible feng shui layout of the residence. Darrell was about to read further to find the solution. Suddenly, Megan's weak voice came within his earshot. "Darrell, have you found the antidote?" Darrell was startled, and without thinking, he took the two books. Then, he walked out the tomb and said to Megan, "I have looked through everywhere, but there was no sign of an antidote." Megan furrowed her eyebrows. There was a trace of disappointment on her face. Darrell asked, "Are you okay? Do you want me to send you to the hospital?" "No, the hospital can't cure it. The effect of weak bones elixir will probably last for 12 hours. I will be fine after that, but I will be weak and feeble during this period." Megan shook her head and replied awkwardly. Darrell was shocked. How could she be so familiar with the weak bones elixir? However, Megan did not want to waste any more time. She waved her hand with difficulty and said, "Take my phone and call the police." Darrell nodded as he crouched and picked up Megan's phone. He gulped to calm his nerves. Megan was slumped and helpless on the ground. Her figure was simply perfect. She had a light sweat on her because she had sparred with the bearded man earlier. So, Darrell went close to her. He could smell the faint fragrance on her body. Gulp. Unconsciously, Darrell swallowed his saliva again. He tried to calm down as he took Megan's phone in front of Megan. After he made a call to the police, Darrell held the phone in front of Megan. Then, Darrell put the phone back in Megan's pocket as he smiled and said, "Well, your subordinates will be here soon." Megan did not respond. Instead, she looked closely at Darrell. "I haven't asked you yet. Why are you here?" Darrell thought for a while and smiled. "I saw a few people sneaking up the mountain, so I followed them out of curiosity. I am also surprised to find out that they are tomb raiders." Darrell said it so casually that Megan suspected nothing and merely nodded silently. Suddenly, they heard the police siren at the foot of the mountain. Darrell patted the dirt on his body and looked at Megan. "Your colleagues have arrived, and I have nothing more to do here. I shall take my leave first." Then he turned around and made a move to leave. "Oh, wait." Megan called out to him. Her weak voice was a little anxious. "You knew about the entire situation, so I don't have to go back with you to record my statement, right?" Darrell looked at Megan and said with a wry smile. "Darrell." Megan bit her lower lip as if she could not make herself say it. She glanced at Darryl before she lowered her head. Can you take me to the foot of the mountain first? Darryl was confused. Why? Megan was anxious. Don't ask. Just do me this favor. The criminal investigation team leader had always been a respectable figure. Yet, she almost fell into the hands of a group of tomb raiders. Besides, her body was in a weakened state. How could she face her subordinates and lead them in the future in that miserable state? She would lose her dignity. Darryl nodded. But, do you have the strength to go down the mountain now? Otherwise. Megan hesitated before she whispered, otherwise, can you carry me down? Megan blushed. Sure. Darryl smiled and nodded. He bent down to carry her. The moment he carried Megan on his back, he could feel Megan's soft body pressed against his back. Darlie gulped again. It was such an awkward ambience when Darlie carried Megan on his back. A few minutes later, they arrived at the Parkins place, and Darryl drove Megan back home. Megan's home was in a high-end residential area. Her home was immaculate, it was almost spotless. There was also a faint scent of fragrance. Megan's jeans and short skirts were scattered in her bedroom, though. As he put her on the bed, Darryl sweated profusely. Even though Megan was not heavy, he had walked quite far. Megan asked quizzically, Darryl, are you a Wing Chun disciple? He was shocked to hear Megan's question, he was frozen to the spot. Disciple? What disciple? Darryl met Megan's gaze and asked, what did you say? What kind of disciple? Episode 59. Are you playing dumb? Megan frowned as she studied Darryl. Why did he not answer me but asked me a question in return? What did you use to defeat those imbeciles just now? Darryl rubbed his nose. That was nothing. I've practiced Wing Chun for a while now. That's not true. Megan shook her head firmly. Your arms moved so widely when you struck just now. That was not Wing Chun. Darryl was speechless. Megan was right. She had taught herself Wing Chun, but she found it useless, it was only a trick for street fights. Darryl shook his head. What sect of Wing Chun were you talking about? What is going on? Don't you know? Megan was still suspicious. When she noticed that Darryl did not pretend to be confused, Megan sighed softly and said, there are 6 main sects of Kung Fu. Don't you know? Megan continued as Darryl did not respond, there are 6 sects of Kung Fu, namely Shaolin, Wudong, Ame, Kunlun, Tian Shan, and Zhaoyo. Each sect has its own style of cultivation, and the type of cultivation is completely different from the usual kickboxing. Those 6 sects used to be very prosperous, but with the development of social science and technology, most of these sects have resumed secular life and started trading businesses in the city. Some even became celebrities and entrepreneurs. Really? Why does it sound like storytelling? Darryl was speechless, he thought that Megan must have teased him. Megan tried to convince Darryl, who was still in disbelief. I don't have to lie to you. In fact, I am a senior sister in the Ame sect. Then, Megan showed him a jade slip. Darryl took a closer look and saw that the words written on it spelled Ame. The words were written in archaic characters, so Darryl was utterly stunned. Then he recalled that when Megan faced the bearded man in his group earlier, she had managed to knock down so many people single-handedly. It seemed like an impossible feat, even though she had training. Finally, Darryl believed Megan. The disciples from the 6 sects are also called cultivators. The realms of martial cultivators include Master, Master General, Martial Marquis, Martial Saint, and Martial Emperor. Each realm is divided into 5 levels. Megan no longer observed Darryl's expression, she just went on and on. Wow! Darryl exhaled deeply and asked, which realm are you? Megan's face darkened, she was embarrassed, I'm just a 5th level master, a step away from reaching the level of a master general. Quite a low cultivation realm, then. Darryl smiled mischievously as he murmured. Megan blushed and argued, cultivation is not easy. Some people joined all the 6 sects and were stuck in the master realm for their entire lives. My cultivation level is considered quite high, at least I'm a 5th level master. Then, Megan changed the subject. Are you really not in any of the sects? Megan had observed Darryl in the earlier fight. Each of his punches landed hard and accurately on his opponents, none of them missed. How could an ordinary person be so powerful? Darryl shrugged. Well, do I need to keep my skills hidden? Don't belong to any sect. Perhaps I am just naturally strong. Megan frowned as she looked at Darryl. She said, stop blowing your own trumpets. Do you think you are born with supernatural power? If I'm not wrong, you must have taken some sort of physique-enhancing elixir. Darryl's expression froze. Elixir? Could it be the elixir that Samson Facey gave me earlier today? Fuck, it must have been that damn elixir. I have practiced Wing Chun, but I could only spar with 2 or 3 people. It was impossible for me to hit a dozed people at one go. Is it really that elixir? Forget it. I won't tell you any more. When she realized that Darryl was consumed in deep thoughts, Megan replied tiredly and then closed her eyes. Megan was so tired after she ate the weak bones elixir, so she fell asleep. Isn't she afraid that I have ill intentions toward her? Darryl was surprised that Megan had fallen asleep on the sofa. He admitted that Megan was a stunning woman, and her graceful figure was simply alluring. However, something else had caught Darryl's attention. He had to find out about the elixir, so he called Samson. Mr. Darby, how may I help you? After the call was connected, Samson spoke politely to Darryl. Darryl went straight to the point. What is the name of the elixir you gave me? Episode 60. It turned out that his great strength was the effect of the universal pill. The more he read the book, the more fascinated he was with the content. There were many elixirs recorded in the book. For example, the divine power pill could make one extremely powerful, and there was also the light spirit pill, which could make the body as light as a feather. However, Darryl had never heard of those pills' names, and their effects were incredibly mysterious. One example was the soul-piercing pill. If the enemy took the pill, coupled with the cultivation method's exercise, one could gain control of the enemy. Really? Is it really that powerful? When he read about the soul-piercing pill, Darryl glanced at the material needed to make the pill. He was dumbfounded to read some of them. Heaven's spiritual water. Rootless stone. Darryl was perplexed. Darryl looked at the other pills, and he noticed the materials needed to refine those pills were extremely rare. He had never even heard of some of it. However, Darryl also found an exception. The materials needed to refine that pill were commonly available. The name of the elixir was Godly Pill. The Godly Pill effect was extraordinary. It would help practitioners break through the bottlenecks of their cultivation progress. Megan told him that many people were stuck in a certain cultivation level in their progress. It would be easy for the cultivators to break through if they took the Godly Pill, would it not? If that's the case, then I can make this pill and sell it to the cultivators. What profit? The materials needed for the Godly Pill were not hard to find at all. The salt and white vinegar required were readily available in Megan's kitchen. Darryl looked at the potted plants on the windowsill for cacti and peony leaves, and he was delighted. After he had gathered all the materials, Darryl went to the kitchen. According to the book, the best way to refine the pill was to use a pill furnace or a pot for brewing Chinese medicine. He could forget about the pill furnace as it was not available. After he searched the kitchen, Darryl found a clay pot. When he got everything ready, Darryl began to refine the Godly Pill. It would take 3 hours to refine the Godly Pill. Darryl did not want to watch the pot as it boiled, so he went back to the living room and started to read The Geomancy of Yin and Yang. The book was fascinating. Daryl was quickly drawn into it. It had been years since Daryl was engrossed in a book. He was completely immersed in it. As he read the book, Daryl tried to practice its theories. He took note of Megan's room's layout and the surrounding geographical environment and started to comment on them. Megan's house had a reasonable layout, its feng shui was quite good. Unconsciously, 3 hours had passed. Daryl hurriedly put the book away and returned to the kitchen. He opened the clay pot and saw a brown pill had formed in it. He was thrilled. He put everything back in its place and then went out to the living room with the godly pill. It was already dawn, and the sky had gotten brighter gradually. Megan, who was asleep on the sofa, had woken up. "You stayed?" Megan was surprised to see Daryl in her house. Daryl replied with a smile, "You were too weak. What happens if a thief breaks into your house in the middle of the night after I left?" Megan said nothing. She looked a little unhappy. He ought to know that there should be a prudent reserve between man and woman. She sat up on the sofa as she thought about it. Daryl's eyes widened suddenly. "You are all well now? Didn't she say that the weak bones elixir's effect will last for 12 hours? That is for ordinary people." Megan said, "I am a cultivator, so it is not the same for me. When I knew that had taken a weak bones elixir, I managed to dispel the effect of the medicine by controlling my internal energy." Megan's expression looked somewhat depressed. She was stuck on the 5th level master and had never been able to break through to the realm of a master general. If she were a master general, she would be able to dispel the effects within 2 hours. Instead, she had spent more than 6 hours on it. "Wow. I thought it would take you a few more hours to recover." Daryl was surprised. Megan was stunned. Then she smiled. "What's so difficult? Do you know how long I have been stuck as a 5th level master? 2 years. Cultivation is not as easy as you think. Don't simply say anything if you don't know any better." Megan waved her hand, irritably. "I don't want to talk to you anymore. It's dawn now, so you should go." Daryl looked at Megan with a smile as he showed her the godly pill. "I have a pill here. I don't know if it can help you." "Pill?" Megan was shocked as she fixed her gaze on the godly pill. For more episode, don't forget to subscribe.